Good evening all, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll ask Katie to introduce herself first, and then I'll follow and carry on with the first few slides. Katie?
Yep. Hello, good evening everyone. I'm Katie Finkill-Coombs. I'm a senior advisor in the Cheshire to Lancashire team in Natural England, and I'm working on local nature recovery strategies alongside Angie, but I'm covering the Liverpool city region and Lancashire.
Thanks, Katie. And I'm Angie Jukes. As Katie said, I'm another senior advisor working in the Cheshire to Lancashire area team, covering the local nature recovery strategies for Cheshire and Greater Manchester. So obviously mine and Katie's areas interlock with the areas that Cheshire Record covers, for example, because Horton and Wirral will fall into Katie's area in Liverpool city region. So we're working very closely together on that, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on through the slides. So we've got about 20 or so slides for you tonight. Should be about 40 to 45 minutes, and then plenty of time for questions at the end. So on to an introduction to local nature recovery strategies. The Environment Act captures the requirements for LNRS in the 25-year plan, where one of the aims of the Act includes the delivery of the nature recovery network for England through the LNRS. These strategies are an ambitious and strategic tool for nature recovery established by the Environment Act. Natural England views them as a new and exciting tool to identify ambitious nature recovery opportunities at a landscape scale. So this presentation will showcase how the pilot LNRSs helped to identify a process of 6 steps to deliver a biodiversity statement of priorities and a local habitat map as part of the LNRS process. These outputs are backed by national and local evidence that helps partners and stakeholders to identify prioritised outcomes. That's objectives, basically, and potential measures, and those are the actual actions for creating or improving habitats to achieve those outcomes. Next slide, please, Katie. So the core purpose of LNRS is to help reverse the ongoing decline of biodiversity and nature. LNRS aims to help restore and link up habitats so that species can thrive. The process will ensure local partners collaborate to agree the best places to help local nature recovery, and Natural England have a leading role in supporting responsible authorities to achieve the purpose, aims and process of LNRS. The strategies are designed as a tool to drive more coordinated, practical and focused action to deliver a bigger, better, more and joined up nature recovery network across the whole of England, across roughly, well, it's actually 48 areas, like to be at county level. LNRS became mandatory in April 2022, and the government have committed to rolling them out from April of 2023 with an aim to produce LNRS mapping in a reasonable state of readiness to inform rollout of biodiversity net gain in November 2023, and with further preparation of LNRS expected to be completed in 2024. Each strategy will enable local partners to deliver 3 objectives for the area that it covers. So it's mapping of the most valuable existing habitat for nature, mapping specific proposals for creating or improving local habitats, both for nature and wider environmental goals, and coordinating agreement of the local priorities for nature's recovery. Detailed locations and potential management interventions are identified during the later stages of the process. I do apologise, I should have said at the start that we will share these slides and the notes that come with them, so don't worry if we're covering a lot of detail, you will get the slides and the notes post-event. Next slide, please, Katie. LNRS will be a mechanism for mapping and planning local delivery of the nature recovery network and support the delivery of biodiversity net gain through local plans. The Environment Act, in addition to establishing LNRS, makes delivering BNG a mandatory part of nature recovery. A key principle of LNRS is that the process must be locally led, evidence-based and co-produced. They bring together communities and decision makers across the public, private and voluntary sectors to prioritise action for biodiversity. So a responsible authority leads on each LNRS, however, stakeholders, partners and local communities will feed into the strategy to create a shared plan for nature recovery. They must be collaboratively produced, with forthcoming regulations under the Environment Act providing a key mechanism for setting minimum standards for how responsible authorities must work with local partners. They should consider opportunities to achieve wider nature-based solutions, The potential opportunities identified in these strategies can include actions to address other environmental objectives that are also positive for biodiversity, for example, river flood management and climate change mitigation through tree planting and peatland restoration. Another ambition of LNRS is to try and align efforts, for example, to help direct the location of green infrastructure through local plans. They should guide and inform other spatial plans within the area, for example, areas of outstanding natural beauty and national park management plans. And LNRS should be seen as a useful and practical tool by landowners and managers, developers, local authorities and communities. They can direct investments such as BNG or carbon credits and help partners to deliver their nature recovery objectives effectively. DEFRA and Natural England are currently exploring how LNRS can be aligned with funding sources such as environmental land management schemes and BNG to further incentivise their delivery. Next slide, please, Katie. So the Environment Act confirms that LNRS must contain two components, which are a biodiversity statement of priorities and a local habitats map. The biodiversity statement of priorities must include an overall description of the area, drawing on existing policies, strategies and planning documents, a description of the ecological sub-areas based on key habitats and species associated with the area, opportunities for linking, increasing or improving the condition of each key habitat, a description for which the creation or improvement of habitats could help provide a nature-based solution, such as climate and flood mitigation, the agreed outcomes that each LNRS will achieve, as well as the potential measures and mechanisms to deliver the desired outcomes, for example, ditch blocking to re-wet degraded peat. There are two examples on the slide from the pilot strategies in Cornwall and Buckinghamshire. So during the pilots, partners found it difficult to distinguish between the outcomes and measures, but broadly, the following examples are: an outcome, for example, is increased tree planting for both biodiversity and flood risk management. And a measure might be how that outcome could be delivered, for example, a mapped timetable of tree planting. Lessons learned from the pilots identified that presentation of data in accessible formats is essential to empower non-specialists to make informed suggestions about local priorities. In addition, the use of stakeholder inputs needs to be transparent so contributors can see their priorities and views reflected. And in some pilots, they categorise priorities into more important and less important to ensure all outcomes captured were retained, but realistically prioritised to inform the statement. And the next slide, please, Katie. The second output is the local habitat map. And this map supports local action by mapping important existing habitats and further informing, linking, increasing or improving the condition of key habitats. This map is the foundation of the LNRS and will be used for identifying areas to expand, improve and create better networks based on the LNRS Principles. The map is created based on local evidence and involves all partners and stakeholders. It maps the most valuable existing habitats and species for nature. This is overlaid with specific proposals for creating or improving habitat for nature and achieving wider environmental goals. It also must identify proposed locations for delivering both the prioritised and other desired outcomes and measures. And I think the next slide is over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Angie. So from August 2020 to May 2021, Natural England ran 5 pilots across England to test the LNRS process, with the lessons learned captured in the report available from the gov.uk web link, and there's a link there to the report at the bottom of this slide. The pilots worked through a step-by-step process shown in the graphic here on this slide, and this was based on the Environment Bill and aimed to ensure that local partners agree, prioritise and map the outcomes to spatially plan nature's recovery. The pilots were managed by Natural England in conjunction with local authorities, and a summary of the lessons learned include that clear leadership and transparency from the responsible authority was crucial in getting others involved from the outset. Establishing clear governance was really important. All the pilots had a pilot area team, which included DEFRA bodies, national parks, AONBs, local planning authorities, and local nature partnerships. And in terms of engagement, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all, since different stakeholders need to be engaged with differently depending on their capacity and their resource. And in particular, recognition of the land manager's role as stakeholders and key delivery partners is essential. The data and evidence. Data needs to be accessible enough to empower non-specialists to make informed decisions about what their priorities are. And we need to make sure that there aren't any data licensing issues. This slide here shows the governance structure from the Cumbria pilot. So Cumbria mapped all the LNRS partners and their involvement levels alongside the process steps outlined on the previous slide. A memo of agreement and LNRS mapping work informed the establishment of a pilot area team supporting the responsible authority. Further engagement also helped to identify relevant partners and stakeholders needed for collaboration and to inform the LNRS process. The Cumbria Local Nature Partnership membership was a main resource for engaging key partners on LNRS through collaborative development group element. Cumbria LNRS are in the process of reviewing their partners mapped in the pilot to ensure their representation from wider partners, such as local community groups, volunteers, and social housing providers. So this slide outlines Angie and I's role as senior advisors in Natural England, leading on LNRS. So our key role is to support the responsible authority to establish LNRS partnerships in the local area. This includes us being the first point of contact on LNRS for partner agencies and bringing in the expertise available from relevant colleagues across Natural England's Cheshire to Lancashire area team and beyond. We'll also provide advice on the implementation of the regulations and guidance as directed by DEFRA and through liaison with our national Natural England team. We have established regular catch-ups with regular colleagues at both the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission to ensure we are aligning national and local priorities. And we're in touch with other Natural England senior advisors working on local nature recovery strategies in neighbouring areas to ensure joint outcomes and delivery of the wider nature recovery network. And this will support a nationally consistent approach to LNRS development. And part of that work will be to consider and develop advice on appropriate monitoring and evaluation. So the Cheshire and Lancashire area team are also considering how farmers and landowners, how we're in touch with, can inform the LNRS. And we're keen to discuss with wider partners how best to establish and manage contact on LNRS with those partners. The slide here levels 2 to 7 in the grey box need to be clarified once the regs and guidance are published, but more detail will be presented on the next slide. So the Environment Act sets out the legal framework for the creation of LNRSs, creating the necessary powers and duties. The regulations will set out the process by which LNRSs are prepared, and responsible authorities will have to follow this process. Statutory guidance will set out in greater detail what an LNRS should contain, and responsible authorities will have to have regard to this guidance. This may or may not contain DEFRA's national policy steer, depending on the ministerial decision. A national habitat map and other information will be provided to the responsible authority, and how this information is used will be steered primarily by the statutory guidance. Additional non-statutory guidance will provide more detailed information on particular aspects of the LNRSs or their preparation. For example, guidance on how species data should be incorporated into the LNRS. The extent and scope of this guidance has not yet been defined and would depend on national coordination, and this will need to have overall coherence. Responsible authorities will be under no direct obligation to have regard to this guidance, but formal guidance issued by government or agencies will still have status, and the responsible authority will need to consider it as part of their general duty as a public body to make reasonable decisions. Other information and data may be provided by governing agencies, but not formally on behalf of the Secretary of State, and how this information should be used may be directly provided in the statutory guidance, but a clear explanation of why information is useful should enable it to gain traction with the responsible authority. And then direct involvement by DEFRA agencies in the preparation of each LNRS in the form of verbal or written guidance and advice at the local level, and assessing whether the process is proceeding correctly. There's national coordination of the advice is likely to provide an important role in prompting consistency between LNRSs. For example, the Natural England Forestry Commission and the Environment Agency have developed a agreed ways of working to help develop each LNRS. This slide provides an outline of the forthcoming regulations, which are due to be published before rollout in April, and it will address the range of activities shown on this slide. There is some further clarification required around sign-off process and requirements at this stage in regulations development. This will need to reflect the range of circumstances that each LNRS area may face in terms of likely governance and structures.
It's back to me now, isn't it?
That's right, Angie.
Thank you, Katie. So this slide shows the range of issues that the forthcoming statutory guidance will potentially address, alongside some of the non-statutory guidance that Katie outlined on the previous slide. These include the processes required under LNRS preparation and the steps required to deliver those processes. Responsible authorities are required to have regard to the guidance, and you'll see that it covers the prioritisation element as well as the mapping aspects of LNRS. So I'll just let you take that slide in for a moment. You'll see on the left-hand side there, it's mostly about the statement of biodiversity priorities, and the items under that sort of clarify the requirements there around describing the strategy area, prioritising for recovery, and measures that might be needed. And then the right-hand side focuses on the local habitat map, in the inclusion of national conservation sites, nature reserves, other areas of particular importance, and areas where biodiversity recovery could make a contribution to other environmental benefits. Going to have the next slide, please, Katie. So this slide outlines an inexhaustive list of potential measures to encourage LNRS delivery. A new strengthened duty on public authorities to conserve and enhance biodiversity includes a requirement to have regard to relevant LNRSs. Mandatory 10% biodiversity net gain means an uplift in the calculation of biodiversity units provides an incentive to focus on sites identified by the LNRS. Indeed, the metric actually references strategically important sites, and that will be those identified in the LNRS. The Environment Act commits government to provide guidance to explain LNRS's role in planning, and we're hoping that the regs and guidance and any revisions to the planning system will actually include that detail. And LNRSs are expected to play a role in the spatial prioritisation for emerging government agri-environment schemes as well. There's the England Peak strategy, funding through Nature for Climate Fund. There's a target to deliver 35,000 hectares of peatland restoration over the next 5 years. There's the tree strategy, funding through Nature for Climate Fund again, prioritising sites for tree planting and forest restoration, with over £600 million allocated to tree planting beyond elm. And then there's the Flood Resilience Fund as well, working with local flood authorities to deliver natural flood management and coastal realignment. And that's obviously where the catchment partnerships may be key players in that. Next slide, please, Katie. For those of you familiar with the planning system, this slide basically explains what LNRSs are not very clearly in planning terms. They are not delivery plans, so there is no requirement for a delivery plan alongside LNRS. Instead, they are a mechanism through which other measures and interventions may be delivered, as outlined previously. Having said that, most responsible authorities, in fact, all of them, I think, are looking at delivery plans on the back of the preparation of LNRS. LNRS are non-binding. Responsible authorities must prepare an LNRS, but are not required to deliver the opportunities identified. However, the Environment Act does require that LNRSs are reviewed and republished regularly, and this will enable progress on delivery to be monitored and to reflect on what has been achieved. They are not lines on maps that confer any level of protection or prevent land uses, such as intensive farming or development. And the local habitat maps are opportunity maps that will guide and inform planning and nature recovery activities. So they are not designated sites in the local habitat map. They are only opportunity maps that will guide and inform the broader planning activity. LNRSs do not give permission to create habitat without consulting the usual specialists in things like the historic environment, landscape, access, etc. Next slide, please, Katie. As statutory regs and guidance for LNRS are still being discussed by government, it's difficult to be absolute about process and requirements at this stage. A summary on how you and your groups can contribute in the earlier stages includes the following, where you can inform responsible authority thinking. So around governance, clear leadership and transparency from the responsible authority is crucial in getting others involved from the start. It's important for RAs to have time to consider how they want to establish their partnership and its ways of working, what existing networks there are, what their role may be, and how those networks can evolve. The process is complex and RAs need to understand that the process and decision-making involved is new. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the three-tiered approach requested by DEFRA for the pilots. And Katie mentioned when she talked about the pilots earlier, that each one had a pilot area team who took responsibility for leading the development of the LNRS and the quality and delivery of the pilot output. So that was typically the local authority that is the responsible authority, plus other local authorities in the area, plus ecological experts from record centres and wildlife trust type agencies, and of course, Natural England as well. The collaborative development group was often the broad range of organisations, quite often the local nature partnership, or that could be the interested parties group, which is the wider group of organisations and partners who are kept informed of progress and provided the opportunity to input at appropriate points. It depended on the area actually as to how they structured their governance. Early engagement with a wide range of people and organisations is also crucial. Effective collaboration takes time, so it's not one of the first things, it is one of the first things to think about in preparing an LNRS. Who are the key stakeholders? Who do we need to work with and who needs to be involved? It's not just about the usual partners. We need to engage with conservation partnerships, local communities and volunteers to deliver a bigger, better and more joined up nature recovery network. DEFRA has put emphasis on engagement. The pilot schemes used online meetings. Obviously, they were occurring during COVID in particular, and they included online whiteboard sessions to engage people on their ambitions for the LNRS. Whilst face-to-face is becoming more acceptable, the accessibility of online meetings and workshops for those with limited capacity or access issues will need to be considered as well. So it'll be a balanced, a hybrid world going forward, particularly around LNRS. The vision is where you're establishing a common understanding of the purpose of LNRS. For example, what it aims to achieve is essential to gathering constructive inputs and help focus stakeholders. It helps everyone stay focused and provides clarity on the purpose of the LNRS. And start to think about the resources needed. There's considerable GIS skills for mapping needed, project management, technical and ecological skills, as well as facilitation of consultation. And looking at the existing networks and data available, DEFRA will provide national data to help with the development of the local habitat map. However, local data sets will be really important in helping to identify habitat creation and restoration opportunities. It is essential to make it clear that the data shared will be protected as needed and anonymised as required, but can inform the strategic mapping that is publicly shared. And you'll see this as an example in some of the pilots. We can share some information with you. And the next slide, please, Katie. So this slide highlights where the process is up to in terms of the initial stages of developing LNRS. So DEFRA have provisional agreements in place with the majority of responsible authorities and are starting conversations about moving to confirm their status. There's an LNRS frequently asked questions document, which was circulated to local authorities in 2022 to give them some ideas on how LNRS should be developed. LNRS consultation in 2021, the outputs from that is on .gov.uk website, and results of the consultation are feeding into the LNRS statutory regs and guidance that have been developed and are being discussed with government now. LNRS senior advisors are continuing conversations with responsible authorities and key partners, which is why Katie and I are here this evening, to ensure they're ready for the LNRS process. And government confirmed LNRS rollout from April 2023 with specific reference in the latest Environmental Improvement Plan 2023 of regs and guidance publication prior to rollout. So we're taking that as a very positive sign that regs and guidance are imminent and about to be published. I think it's back to you for the last few slides, Katie.
Thanks, Angie. So this slide here just demonstrates what Angie and I have been doing for the last year and also rolling out into 2023. So all the LNRS senior advisors in Natural England have undergone a comprehensive training course covering both technical and leadership modules to ensure we have the skills required to support responsible authorities. Natural England is developing an LNRS network on SharePoint. This network is a tool for responsible authorities to use as a means for communicating and collaborating with other regional and national responsible authorities. The network will enable access to information, best practice, facilitate join-up across LNRS boundaries, and allow responsible authorities access to pre-recorded training modules. Natural England will be responsible for managing the portal, which is likely to go live when responsible authorities have been officially appointed. And then the formal responsible authority appointment and funding confirmation will be finalised by April 2023 at the latest. And DEFRA has already awarded responsible authorities 2 rounds of funding by a Section 31 grant to help recruit and build capacity ahead of April 2023. LNRS became mandatory in April 2022 and were established by the Environment Act. And at the end of November, responsible authorities received an email from DEFRA to confirm they aim to roll local nature recovery strategies from April 2023. And this provides an indication when the regs and guidance are likely to be published. DEFRA confirmed they do not expect responsible authorities to begin LNRS preparation before these are published and responsible authority arrangements have been formalised. Natural England, we're working with consultants Adept to rearrange regional webinars for responsible authorities, which were originally scheduled for October last year. And these are to take place early in 2023 and will look to provide further information on regulation, guidance and funding. So this slide shows the LNRS areas in England for the North West with responsible authorities as the initial local government agency mentioned, as well as Natural England senior advisors supporting that responsible authority. Angie and I were working closely with our equivalent colleagues in neighbouring LNRS areas in Shropshire, Staffordshire, Derbyshire and Cumbria. And we're also working with government agencies and partners working on coastal areas such as the MMO, IFCA, the Dee, Mersey and Morecambe Bay Partnership to understand their priorities for habitats and species in the marine and coastal environment. It's worth noting that although there is a statutory requirement for LNRSs to extend to mean low water, it is important to recognise the connectivity of different habitat types, particularly between freshwater habitats further inland and coastal habitats. The LNRS could help to identify where coastal habitats such as salt marsh and sand dunes could be created or enhanced and therefore restore natural processes, natural functioning coastal ecosystems and improve resilience to climate change. So since we've been in post, Angie and I have been busy presenting LNRS to key strategic partners while we're waiting for DEFRA to publish the regulations and guidance. This ensures that they're ready on the starting line when the LNRS starting gun fires and that they understand they need to share evidence and data, they need to consider their own biodiversity priorities and engage in the LNRS process in each area relevant to them. As the lead DEFRA agency in LNRS, we meet regularly with local representatives from other arm's length bodies, such as the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission, to update them on any LNRS activity. The LNRS national team colleagues are starting to work with national agencies to understand how they will effectively engage with 48 LNRSs, but we've also met with them locally to establish a relationship for our LNRS areas. We meet regularly with all local authorities working in responsible authority and area, and we've met with the wildlife trusts and the local data record centres and a variety of partnerships who need to be aware and inform LNRSs. Angie and I attend the local nature partnerships, catchment partnerships, and we have input into the natural capital work in each area. Landowners like Peel and National Trust are aware of LNRS due to presentations from us, and there are a wide range of agencies shown on this slide who have also ensured that are aware of LNRS and the implications and opportunities for their organisations. In particular, in Cheshire, Angie has worked with other senior advisors working in the Peak District National Park area to ensure that officers at the Peak District National Park working on their own nature recovery plan take account of LNRSs that our emerging plan informs emerging LNRSs. We have also engaged with our Welsh colleagues to ensure that they work on nature recovery over the border is informed by English LNRSs. And then finally, last year, we coordinated a species organisation presentation on LNRSs, which some of you may have attended. The information gathered from agencies attending will be shared with responsible authorities once they have confirmed the LNRS is formally commences. We asked each species group to fill in a questionnaire to obtain information on available species data, species declines, and supporting habitat requirements. The results of the survey should help inform creation and restoration of habitats when developing the LNRS. So I'm just going to provide a brief update on a species project that Natural England are helping to fund in the Northwest. So the Natural England's Cheshire to Lancashire team are funding 2 particular species projects to inform the development of LNRSs in Cheshire, Liverpool City region and Lancashire. These are replicating and trialling the work done by Paul Barrington at the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit in the Greater Manchester Pilot LNRS. The 3 record centres are undertaking a project on development of species baseline information, and this is a desk-based study to assess trends in species distributions and possible abundance for agreed indicator species by using existing verified species records over the last 10 years. Where indicator species are being selected to represent a range of broad habitat types to inform the development of a holistic nature recovery network for the relevant geographical LNRS areas. This project aims to identify species trends and distribution representative for a range of broad habitat types. Merseyside Environmental Advisory Service and the Cheshire Wildlife Trust are undertaking a species distribution modelling of grassland species. Both of the proposed modelling approaches, Condartis and Circuitscape, use electronic theory to underpin a model to identify the movement of a population across a landscape using habitat blocks. In this project, each agency will test these software to model the habitat connectivity of a range of grasslands at their area coverage scale using known species distribution, capabilities, dispersal, and restrictions for movements across wider landscape uses, which may either support movement and dispersal or hinder the specific habitat or land use type for that species. This modelling will identify whether there is a grassland network across the project area and also identify potential bottlenecks and where the network may need enhancing through creation of new grassland habitats such as stepping stones and restoration of existing grasslands. So I think this is my final slide. Just to state that there are a range of resources which we can share that are available to read or watch to find out more about LNRSs here in our own region. There is a link in the lessons learned report from the pilot study, which is shown on slide 6. And there's also a Word document which can be circulated with our slides, which provides links to the latest work of the 5 LNRS pilots, as well as links to 3 free recordings on YouTube. Sam Evans at Greater Manchester Combined Authority delivered a presentation with Amanda Wright from Natural England on their LNRS pilot work, and Paul Barrington at Greater Manchester Ecology Unit gave a detailed presentation on his work on mapping for the LNRS pilot in Greater Manchester, including an explanation on how species data was used to fill in the gaps of habitat data. A detailed transcript of the presentation, together with Paul's slides, has been produced for interested parties and can be provided on request from either of us. The third recording in LNRS and data toolkits covers presentations about Natural England's resources, including the Natural Course Ecological Toolkit, the Green Infrastructure Mapping Tool, and the Living England video. And I think that's it from both Angie and I.
Do we want to, at this stage, before we take questions, did we want to give Eric a chance to come in from record and just talk about what you're doing, Eric, with the project that we outlined on the last couple of slides there?
Thank you, Angie and Katie. As they've said, we're basically been commissioned by Natural England to look at the species data for our area, and obviously our area, the record area, covers both the Liverpool City, part of the Liverpool City region, LNRS, so that's Wirral and Halton, if you can see my mouse on the page there, and obviously it also covers Cheshire East, Cheshire West, Cheshire East, and Warrington, which is the Cheshire LNRS. So we've been asked essentially to present. I've sort of paraphrased our request. The request that we got given is basically to present the distribution of important populations of selected cohorts, so groups of species that are associated with particular habitat types. And essentially this is broken down into sort of three parts, if you will. The first being to assess the existing species data that we hold and that is out there for our area, and check that the species data that we're looking at is representative of species distribution. Secondly is to generate species distribution maps based on a selective species that are representative of broad habitat types. And then use recent data, so the last 10 years or so, to assess trends, as Katie said, as a sort of to create a baseline of basically to sort of bolster, if you will, or to inform the strategies that will be coming out as part of the LNRS. So we are we are literally at the very sort of start of this, if you will. We're just getting into this process, and we're still on we're still working on developing the species list. We've basically used the priority habitats in conjunction with a cut down data set focused on the Section 41 species, so that's the NERC Act, Section 41 species, and focusing in on our local species of local conservation concern. So I did an analysis against the priority habitats, which you can see here in the slide on the right hand side, and basically came up with a cut down list. So essentially that cut down list has been then or is in the process of being passed out to local experts for their input on it, so we can weed out things where we're data deficient, or that are sort of occasional visitors, or that are where we have restrictions. So a good example would be in our area would be adder, which we know is the only extant site we have for adder is Risley Moss, really, in the area. So it's to look at those species and to be able to say, actually, we know we need to remove those or discount those at this stage, because there's no you won't really find any information, or won't be able to derive a great deal from them if they're just in one location. It doesn't help us build an opportunity necessarily for habitat recreation or habitat improvement or creation. Sorry. So yeah. So as well as the species list, we're also working to a list of broad habitats, and these obviously the species that we're looking at should have a sort of an affinity or an association with priority habitats, and those priority habitats will sit underneath these broader habitat types. So at the moment, these are the broad habitat types that have been suggested for use in our area. Again, we'll be asking our species experts, our experts within the county, as to whether there is any need to amend these or add to these or tweak these in any way, but we're in that process at the moment. So the whole idea of the process is that the key thing, as sort of Katie alluded to, is to identify key areas for habitat creation and restoration. On the right here, you can see an example map. It is just an example. It isn't real data in there at the moment, because, as I say, we're not that far into it. So I thought, well, I need to show you something that, here's what it might look like. Here's one I prepared earlier. And essentially, this is the idea that we can show sort of biodiversity hotspots, but also you can show those lighter areas where there's opportunities for habitat creation or habitat improvement works, where you've got existing habitat, but it may not be as good a condition. And essentially the species trends. So where we've got the data, where the data holds up, i.e. we have enough data over a good period of time to be able to show things like abundance data changes, and where we're seeing changes in that sort of abundance over time, then those trends will be put forward to help inform and target species that are in most need of intervention. And I think that's probably it from me, really. It is a very whistle-stop tour. So yeah, that's it.